Brilliant. Thank you. So thanks so much for having me. It sounds like a really lovely group to be part of. Yes, thank you, Emma. So to start with, really, I will be coming at this from the kind of fundraising and data perspective rather than Salesforce specific technical knowledge perspective. And also, I'm not a legal professional, so this is very much the information I've gathered from the research I've done online, my understanding to date, having worked with consent in various forms over the last many years, and also general conversations with different charities that I've worked with, again, over the past few months, thinking about this. So, to begin with, hi everyone. My name is Paula or Paula, and I run Flow Strategies. I've been in this sector. I always say to people, I've never worked anywhere else. I've only ever worked for charities, and I've been in fundraising, data, communications, and operations for about 13 years now. Um, I predominantly sit as that person between data and fundraising and try to communicate between the two teams. So I have kind of a level of technical understanding, but I look at fundraising, data management, and kind of fundraising teams very holistically, and try to make sure that they have their operational house in order to be able to raise more money. I mostly work with small charities, and I do CRM migrations and data management, but I do it at a smaller, lower level. So I work with CRMs like Donify, Beacon. Actually, I've only just become Beacon implementation partner, and I work with kind of smaller organizations, just getting them to think about how to move into having a structured CRM for the very first time. And again, noted on the slide, I am not a legal professional. So if you do need additional legal advice on any of this, please do look out for some information. There's loads of people talking about this now. It's a very hot topic. Um, so, where this change comes from. All of this sits under the Data Use and Access Bill, which I've added a sort of a screenshot of on the right side, and it's quite a large parliamentary bill that packages up lots of different policy updates that have been sort of floating around for a while, and the changes we are talking about today essentially reflect the sort of ongoing pressure from the Information Commissioner's Office, the DMA, which is the Data and Marketing Association, and the fundraising regulator. And they've all been advocating strongly for this part of the bill to sort of stay intact and be passed. So the bill itself was passed in June 2025. And the aim is to give charities kind of more of a kind of level playing field with commercial brands when it comes to email marketing, while keeping the supporter protections in place as well. But even though the bill was passed in June, you'll see again in the screenshot, the royal assent was now, I believe the word for that is completed. But it after that stage, which sort of again on paper looks like the final stage, it takes a couple of months for the bill to be enacted. So that's where we are at now, and we're waiting for that to happen. Again, on average, from what I've seen online, different people talking about this, it takes a couple of months. So people are now sort of speculating that this is something that will happen in January. So you do need to keep an eye on this as sort of action number one. And the best way to do that would be to either keep up to date to what the Information Commissioner's Office are saying about this. And they, I believe, do have a newsletter you can sign up to. And there's also the fundraising regulator. So again, as the regulator, they'll be the ones to update you once this actually happens. Again, do look into potentially signing up to receive the e-news as well. And the big note here is that we cannot use it just yet. So all of these different conversations that are happening in the sector at the moment are all about preparing for this once the bill is actually enacted. Now, what it is and what the new rules require. So Soft opt-in basically is the ability to rely on legitimate interest instead of needing explicit consent for email. At the moment, if you send someone an email about your fundraising or your work, you do need to get them to tick a box, right? So, as they're giving you their email address, they need to explicitly state that they want to receive email communications from you. Uh, Soft opt-in changes that, which means that you don't need an explicit yes, but you do need to give them a clear and simple way to opt out. And that's both at sign up. So at the point where they are providing you the email address, they need to be able to opt out of those communications. And also in every email afterwards, they need to be able to do that as well. This is essentially what already exists for direct mail, and commercial brands actually have been using this for many years as well. Charities essentially have been the odd ones out for a very long time. So this sort of brings everything back in line, and that's why there have been a lot of obviously the ICO, DMA, and fundraising regulator have been working hard to make that happen. What the new rules require. So soft opt-in can only be used if every condition is met, and those conditions are listed on the slide. So you must be a registered charity. Your emails must be clearly linked to furthering your charitable purposes, and what those charitable purposes are for the organization will need to define by themselves. These can be broad, but they still need to connect very clearly to your mission, your values, your income generation, or any actions that you want the supporters to take. Um, then the person's data must have been collected as part of them expressing interest or supporting you in some way. So if you look at the data sources for how you obtain these email addresses, you need to think about what are the actions, right? So are they signing a petition? Are they requesting for some sort of an information, a bit of information? Maybe they are signing up to become a volunteer. Essentially that action, so them giving you the email address as part of that action, acts as the implied consent behind the soft opt-in. You also must make sure that there's a clear, simple way to opt out, as I said before, and that is again when they give you the details and in every email after. And it is absolutely essential, and something to really bear in mind at this stage is that you cannot apply this retrospectively. So you have to sort of at the point of when you decide that you want to start using this model, only at that point and onwards, as you collect the data, you'll be able to apply this new model. Sorry, let me just see. Scroll to the next slide. There you go. So why this is such a big shift? As we I don't know how many of you have gone through that in 2016, but that was the sort of a fairly fresh stage of my career, going from sort of a junior member of staff to being, I think, a database officer at the time. And it was quite a shift going through GDPR. This is also one of those similar type of situations where things are, I think, are going to kind of shift quite massively for charities, and it is going to reshape charity marketing, in the same way as GDPR did back in 2016, I would say. My personal opinion would be that GDPR has massively restricted how we communicate with supporters, and soft opt-in almost in a way does the opposite. It gives charities a lot more access to a much wider audience, but only if we handle it properly. There's a lot of money, obviously, that could be lost if charities ignore this change, but also a lot of money that could be potentially lost because we do it carelessly. So, and this is where kind of that data understanding of the data structure and data processes will come in as one of the most important elements of this kind of project of moving to this new model. Another thing that's really important to note is that we need to make sure that we are sending people emails to people who actually want to hear from us. Um, just because we can apply soft opt-in doesn't mean that you don't have to think about supporter experience. And if anything, it's the opposite, right? You'll need to think about, and again, this is more for kind of marketers and fundraisers, but it is a team project. So we all need to think about what that looks like. And I always kind of say that data comes in once you've defined what it is you're trying to achieve. And what your program and supporter experience needs to look like. And then you sort of put, using data structures, put the right things, processes in place in order for that to happen. So good segmentation, good use of existing data, making sure people get relevant content will be essential. I think, again, the way I see this, if someone gives you that tick box and specifically says, I'm interested in receiving, in most cases, it's very explicit newsletters, for example. I know I'm expecting a newsletter at least once a month. If you are not explicitly opting into something and you're starting to receive a lot of generic emails, you might question as to why and how you got on that list to begin with. So that segmenting donors or actually supporters of any kind or subscribers of any kind will be very important to make sure that you're not negatively affecting your deliverability as well, which I'll mention slightly further down. Um, this is one of those moments where, doing it badly could cause real damage. But actually, if you do it really well, could give charities a huge boost. Gray areas to think about. There is a lot of room for interpretation. Some areas are not going to be black or white. It's very much of a, for example, charities will need to sit down and think about what they deem to be, part of their charitable purpose. Whether, for example, they might want to include beneficiaries in receiving fundraising asks under soft opt-in going forward. So there are lots of conversations to be had and decide what works for you and how you as an organization then interpret that. There's a lot about kind of, thinking about relationship sensitivity ethics. Then another thing to remember is that, and this is probably quite obvious, but I thought it might be worth stating that as well. Unsubscribe links in emails are still required in every email under PECA. And PECA is the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulation. And that soft opt-in is about kind of making sure that the opt-out exists at the moment of someone giving you their information, and then that unsubscribe will have to be there for all the communications going forward. We do need to acknowledge that switching to opt-in, as I said, will create some confusion for supporters. So they might not understand how they ended up on that list or why they're receiving that email, which then eventually could end up you kind of getting, can lead to spam reports and then impact deliverability. So you need to really carefully manage that transition and think about the supporter journey. And again, as this is becoming obvious now, this is definitely not just a data issue. I always say kind of the data team has to always be present in these conversations, but this is a fundraising conversation, it's a marketing conversation. It has huge implications for supporter experience, for engagement strategies, for long-term income. So every organization is trying to build stronger first-party data, and it grows your pool of potential supporters. It drives income massively. Soft opt-in could make building that list much easier, but it needs to be thought out really well, and the implementation has to be a team effort. So, practical stuff. What we can do now to prepare for it. So Forward Action, which is a consulting firm, have put together a really cool "Are you ready?" Type of checklist. So if you go on their website, what I did, I just typed it in Google, just kind of forward action, are you ready for soft opt-ins? And then if you go on the website, they ask you to put in the email address and your name, and then you get this to your inbox. But it's quite a useful kind of checklist of items. So within each one of those six sections that I mentioned on my slide, they have some bullet points of the kind of things to do and things to think about. So it's worth looking at that. Um, uh, but yeah, based on that, I kind of fully agree with the lineup and the approach. And I would say the first starting point really is for you to build a project team, and perhaps before you even do that, start having this conversation within your organization. And it sounds like people who are on this call already are doing that, but they're questioning, what is it? Do we need to think about this? Do I need to know more about what, how this could impact us? So I'd certainly start having these questions or asking these questions to the right people and starting to get teams together for a quick call just to say, how much do we know about this? Where are we at? Do we want to sit down and have a think about whether this could work for us? And build a bit of a kind of a working group for it. Um, Make sure fundraising comms data people are all in the room or on those calls. And I would say a good starting point after kind of learning a bit more about it would be to look at the potential financial implications for your organization if you were to go ahead with this. And actually, what would happen if you don't? What could the financial implications be if you don't do that? Um, so, what's the pool of people that this could open our ability to communicate with, and what's the likelihood, or can we calculate how much we could perhaps get in donations from these individuals in year one, year two, and year three? Then the next thing after that project team is together, I would look at the CRM. And you really want to make sure it can tell the difference between explicit consent, the different types of soft opt-in, and kind of people who have opted out as well. You may need new tags, you may need new fields, you may need a new segmentation structure, and you also want to test data flows to make sure nothing breaks. I'll talk a bit more about the kind of practical approach and how I would, again, look at that within the kind of CRM, what I would start looking at in the next slide. Um, then you want to look at the forms. So once the database structure is in place, you really want to look at all your data sources. So where are you getting that data from? And can we make sure that we update all those forms? And before I say update them now, prepare for updating them. You don't need to kind of make any live changes to the forms, again, because the model is not something we can start using just yet. But have a think about how those forms would need to be restructured, particularly, if these are in-house forms, that might be easier. But actually, if these are hosted by other fundraising platforms, what are they doing? Are they planning to change their model? Are they going to allow different fields to be available or the wording to be changed? You want to start having these conversations early on. Or if you are not the people who manage these fundraising platforms, make sure that you inform and just ask these questions of those fundraisers to ask if they are ready for this. Again, it has to be very much of a team effort, because from experience, as someone who sat in operations, in data, and fundraising teams separately over the years, they don't tend to my personal experience don't tend to talk to each other very well. So it has to be a team effort, because this sort of soft opt-in change very much sits somewhere in the middle, somewhere in between all of these roles. And particularly around these kind of different workshops, webinars, and informative sessions about the changes. I also see people who are direct marketers talking about this, people who are legal professionals talking about this, and fundraisers talking about this, and people who sit in ops doing the same. So again, sit somewhere in the middle. Um, Look at your supporter journeys. As I've said before, people might not know why they ended up on the list, so make sure you ease them in, that you create that seamless journey. If someone has if they made a donation, it's easier. But if someone's, submitted an inquiry on the website and you have decided that they might be interested in hearing from you, what does that first email look like? Create a bit of a journey to ease them into receiving these communications, particularly that welcome journey. And keep track of your data and your email performance. Stay updated, obviously, by subscribing to the fundraising regulator to kind of make sure that you understand when these changes are coming in. But I would say also it's very important for you to think about, as you track email performance, if it's not doing very well, if you're actually losing a lot of subscribers, have a think about this. You don't have to go with this model. You can sort of potentially implement or test it. Again, you'd need to really think about what that looks like. But if it's not creating the desired change, again, there's lots of interpretation, so there's lots of movement you could create. It's not set in stone. Um, so it's worth starting to think about all of that now. Um, and then, yeah, be ready to adjust, these changes, albeit in terms of the bill being enacted, happen quite quickly. That adjustment, that period of implementation, and then pivoting and trying to make it work for your organization, how it interprets things. It's difficult to get that right from the get-go. We can see with GDPR, I still see organizations that are barely keeping it legal in terms of their approach, and others that have very rigid, rigorous, advanced models for it. So it's very much of a scope, and no one's expecting you to get everything in place right away. So adjust it until the organization gets to the point where it's comfortable with it. And then lastly, the most important bit is how to get your CRM ready. So again, this is very much my take from someone who works with smaller organizations and tries to get people who are not perhaps data professionals to build something that's quite easy for them to use. So, as I said, getting your CRM ready is going to be one of the most important pieces of work in this whole process. Um, soft opt-in only works in your database when you can accurately store and interpret the different types of permissions you have. And if the system gets it wrong, you run the risk of emailing the wrong people and missing supporter preferences, and that damages trust and then deliverability, and there can be a lot of issues further down the line. So this step is very much about making sure you really put a rigid kind of you test thing, you think it through well, you put the right things in place, you test it, and then adjust it if needed going forward. So before I even start on the bullet points, I'd say the very first thing to think about would be to make sure that you define what soft opt-in eligibility looks like for your organization. And I would say, what are the different forms? What are the different ways in which people could, or actually, yeah, what are the different forms that people would need to complete where them providing an email address would mean that they would be eligible for soft opt-in, right? So what are the different data sources through which people could come in that would be defined as them being eligible for that? So have a think about what that looks like for you. Then make sure that your CRM can distinguish between different types of consent. So again, with most CRMs now, you would just need kind of an email opt-in or email opt-out. Now you'll have email opt-in before you started with this new model. So these are people who had a hard opt-in before the changes came into force in your organization. Then you'd also have all your opt-out, so people who have explicitly opted out of communications. But now you'll also have a group who are eligible for soft opt-in. So email soft opt-in, you could say. And also potentially, or you can always leave this blank, group that is not eligible for soft opt-in. So it's something to think about what that would look like and where that tagging would sit, whether it would sit under the same field as the email opt-in or opt-out sits now. Once you know that your CRM can hold these different permissions, the next step would be to create or actually, well, as I said, that tagging system, but have also have a think about the granularity of communications that you might be recording already. You know, what types of communications the person might want to receive. Where does that sit? Because you're now adding more options to the kind of the tagging system, right? So you're not going with opt-in or opt-out. You really want to make sure that the system is as clear and clean enough for you to be able to use it in segmentation, which with this new model sounds like you'll be doing a lot more segmentation, or the fundraising teams will be. So try to keep it clear, straightforward, and well structured, and have a think about what that will look like in terms of using different filters in different reports. In email marketing, particularly if you have, and again, I'm technically not very strong in this area, but if you're thinking about kind of if there is an integration with MailChimp or any other email marketing platforms, have a think about. Firstly, I'll probably speak to them to see what they're doing about this, whether they're creating any new additional features to support this. But what does that integration look like? You know, whether the mapping is going to have to change, and how is that data sharing between the two platforms going to work? Um, Segmentation, as I said, will be very important. So set up segmentation rules and saved filters so that you can sort of differentiate between the different types, different tags. Um, Also, make sure you update all the suppression lists. Again, not just yet, but prepare for it. How many different suppression lists do you have that will need updating? What are the different reports that you'll need to update to make sure that you factor all of this in? Particularly around kind of wider organizational reporting. If you have KPIs you will report on, or fundraising targets, where you're looking at different campaigns, you look at, you know, kind of email, again, deliverability, open rates, and things like that. Will you want to differentiate? Do you have any supported profiles that you'll want to look at, again, based on whether they've explicitly opted in or not? So really want to look at the entire program. Testing is very important, I'm sure we all know, but just making sure you create enough space and time for testing and not undervalue it. You know, again, getting this wrong, particularly that it's such a significant change, could be massive. So it's just making sure that you see, you know, how you want to manage this as a project. But I always say start with smaller groups of people, and then kind of slowly ease yourself into it. Um, Sense check legacy data. Even though soft opt-ins can't be applied retrospectively, you'll still want to kind of understand what data you hold at the moment, where the gaps are, which supporters will continue under existing rules, and then cleaning up those old records and removing anything that's sort of unclear or inaccurate will obviously make that transition smoother going forward. I'd review kind of different fields, again, forms, workflows, see if you need to create any new fields, adjust automations where needed so that any supporters who sort of opt out are immediately suppressed from any relevant areas. The easier you can make it for the fundraising team, the better, I always say, because you know, sometimes you go all in to something like this. You set up a structure and you think this all works so well, it's so easy, but actually a couple of months down the line, you know, you've forgotten the detail. So make sure that that setup is clear but also well documented, so in case something has to change, it's easy to amend it going forward. um I think that's probably everything around the practicalities. Just some final thoughts. You know, you don't have to use soft opt-in or don't have to use it right away, but it's something that's worth knowing about and considering, again, around the financial implications of it. Um, but the thing is, the landscape will move forward anyway. So if you don't adapt at some point, you might find yourself falling behind other organizations that obviously can then grow their audience much more easily. So I would say the best thing to do now would be to start planning and to start getting the right people involved early in this process, and really think through your supporter experience and make sure the CRM can actually handle the level of detail this will require. I'd say, at the end of the day, the most important thing is that supporters feel respected and in control. And I would probably work backwards from that, and create, again, kind of a working group, but make sure that each team have a role to play in which part of the process they think about and then manage, because this will be very much kind of, it will require a team-wide discussion, but I think it's quite linear in a sense that the fundraising team and comms team need to think about what the supporter journeys look like, what which groups of people this will apply to, and at that point you really then look at the data structure and what needs to change on the CRM in order to be able to put all of these new changes in place and for it to work as well as it can do. Um, Lots more information on this online. Everyone's talking about it. So you can find it again from a legal perspective, from the CRM perspective. You can find it from the fundraising, from the direct marketing perspective. So this is just a very quick snapshot of what's happening. I hope it was easy enough to understand what this means. I can try and answer any questions you might have over email. I'm going to have to shoot off. But yeah, lots of information on this online, so I hope this is a good starting point. I will stop sharing now.
Amazing, fantastic. Thank you so much, Paula.
Thanks,
Lovely.
everyone.
Amazing. Thank you. That was super, super helpful. I think you've covered off quite a lot of the questions that people are asking as well. And I think there's just an awful lot of stuff for people to really think about. And I think I'm sure there will be more that comes out in various conversations. And I think there's going to be many different ways to approach this in a Salesforce world. So that's something we can all think about further. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. Thanks, Paula. Okay. That was a very full-on session and very interesting piece. I know there's lots of chat going on in the chat, which is great. I think, yeah, it's going to take some time to figure out what some of that looks like. And it's also going to be interesting to see how some of the products pivot as well in terms of what they currently offer. Okay, let's hand over to Michael.
All right. Do I have the screen share powers I need?
Should do.
Okay, now I just have to be able to find the Zoom window to be able to do this. Okay. Share this one. Are you seeing my screen, the actual slide, not the presenter view?
We are seeing the presenter view.
Ah, damn it. All right, switch. Now?
Okay, we just know what's coming up next. That's brilliant. Thank you, Michael.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. This is going to be pretty informal. I want to talk about the current and future worlds of permissions and permission sets and how to manage user access in Salesforce. So let me start with a quick introduction. So I'm Michael Kolodner. I'm outside of Philadelphia in the United States. I'm a solo nonprofit consultant doing mostly I work with nonprofits doing program management on the platform. Obviously, a lot of my organizations also do fundraising, but that's not where my main focus and interest lie. Blah, blah, I'm a Salesforce MVP. Something you might not know about me, I'm a competitive saber fencer. I've been doing that for more years than I want to admit. So come talk to me about that sometime. I also have a blog, which I hope many of you subscribe to. If you don't, please go to freelikeapuppy.tech and subscribe or read my work. It's always fun to hear from people who have read my blog. And in fact, today's conversation, it's really not going to be a presentation. is based on 3 posts that I recently wrote about this topic. The QR codes are there. You can also go to Free Like a Puppy and easily find them by searching. So I'm just going to go through a very quick rundown of each of the 3 posts and what they covered, and then I want to have time for discussion and questions and conversation. If you didn't get these QR codes, I can go back to this slide later, but we'll just keep moving. So like I said, quick rundown of what those posts covered. So the first post was called Perms Are Not for Hair, Understanding User Access. And here I laid out sort of where things are and where they're going. So let's start with the information in that. So at the most basic level, you have to think about what license type you have given a user. So in many nonprofit cases, we don't think about this very much because we've gotten the Power of Us grant of 10 free full enterprise edition Sales and Service Cloud licenses. In the new world with nonprofit cloud, some of you might also have 10 full licenses onto which you can layer a permission set license for the nonprofit cloud products. But we're talking just for a second about the license. So full user licenses could be contrasted with integration user licenses, which work very differently and come initially with very limited access. That's the whole point. You could be using platform licenses, which have other restrictions. And once you've thought about the license, the next thing you have to choose, right? And we've all seen this when we set up new users, is every user has to have a profile. So you've got the license, you're already layering on the profile, and in the current world, I would say most organizations, the profile is what is granting all or most of the user access that most organizations are thinking about. So the profile is going to control some of your app settings, like do you have subscribe to reports and do you have chatter, or are you forced to do multi-factor authentication? And it can also have object and field level security. So can you see the accounts object? Can you see all the fields on the account object, etc.? That was the state of the art, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, was that everything was on the profile. Salesforce announced I forget now, because it's in the blog post, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. Salesforce announced that they were intending to end the field level and object security on profiles in a couple of years. Spoiler alert, they have walked that back, but that was the announcement, and that is still the direction that Salesforce wants to go. So Salesforce wants to go to the point where a profile is very, very stripped down, and it will have only those things that are one-to-one with a person. I'll come back to what that means. But once profiles would get to that point, then everything else would have to be granted in some other way, which would mean a permission set. So thinking about that future world, what's one-to-one with a user? Page layouts, default record types, or other default things, right? Anything that you can't, page layout is my best example, right? You must choose which page layout someone is seeing based on something that they cannot have multiple of, which is to say either user license or profile. So, it wouldn't make sense to say, well, the development people see this profile, see this page layout, the program management people see this page layout, but what do we do with that person who's both fundraising and development, or fundraising and program management? You can't show them both page layouts. So page layout assignments are one-to-one with profile, exactly as they've been forever. It's slightly different now for page layouts because dynamic forms might control your page layout rather than a page layout assignment, but you get the idea that these are the one-to-one things. Defaults, of course, like what is the default record type that someone will create when they create a new account? That, of course, has to be one-to-one. That's kind of what a default means. You can have access to multiples, but you're going to default to one. So profiles are not going away. They will have to have some pieces of the user access model, also some security, right? Certain profiles might have login access hours or IP ranges, things like that. So the profile is still going to be there, but it's going to have much less on it is the goal, and it will be stripped down to just these one-to-one things. If you think about it in terms of login hours and IP ranges, you could think of the profile being fundamentally about some security stuff, and then you're going to layer on everything else. So then we get to permission sets. I think probably most of us on the call. I see that there's chats, by the way. Please jump in if you have a question, because I can't monitor the chat and look at everything. So please jump in if you want to ask a question. Permission sets, I think, are probably familiar to a lot of us, but we might not have used them as extensively as we're going to want to in the future. Permission sets layer on permissions. So you could make a permission set for a new object that you've just created where you only want a handful of people to see this new object. Then you just put permissions to see that object in a permission set, and you only assign that permission set to the right people. In the future world, everything should be on permission sets, and you give permission sets to everyone to give them any access. And then, of course, you have those ones that you only give to certain people. The last thing I mentioned in that first blog post is I don't use permission set groups. First of all, that makes it way easier for me to discuss all this stuff because I can talk about licenses, profiles, and permission sets, and I'm done. But permission set groups, I'll tell you quickly why I don't use them. So permission set groups are kind of interesting. They allow you to, just like it says in the name, group permission sets, and then you just assign the permission set group to a user and they get all the permission sets. I'll show you why in a moment, or I'll talk about why in a moment. That's not that fantastically useful because instead of just assigning a permission set group, you could assign a pile of permission sets, a group, if you will, of permission sets. It's just as easy. Permission set groups have one feature that I don't find that useful and one downside that I find super problematic. So the feature, to start with that, the reason some people like permission set groups, besides the group nature that can be handy, is they have what's called permission set muting within the permission set, which means you could give a whole bunch of permissions in the permission set, and then you could turn some of them off within that permission set. The example would be use a permission set group to give people create, read, edit, and delete on a bunch of objects, and then mute out the delete so they don't have delete perms. I actually, first of all, find that a little confusing because you add the permission and then you take it away. It doesn't seem that useful to me. And more importantly, and confusingly for people, the muting only applies within the permission set. Sorry, oh God, now I'm going to mess everyone up. The muting only applies within the permission set group. So if you give them another permission set group or another permission set that includes certain permissions, it will override that muting. So it's really, you can't sort of apply muting and turn off something for a person entirely. So I find it not as useful as it could be. In the example of the delete, I would rather create a baseline permission set that does not give delete and then layer on delete for those people that need it. All right. The next thing I talked about is starting to use this layer cake metaphor for permissions. So to just torture the hell out of this metaphor, The layer cake is made, you need a recipe for how you're going to bake your layer cake. And that recipe is a persona, which is to say, we're going to talk about what is the job function and what do the people need to do within that job function to do their job. That's the list of permissions they need. And the kitchen is the user access policies. This is a feature of Salesforce user access policies that allows you to automatically apply permission sets or permission set groups and to add people to things like public groups. So if you can define a persona, you can automatically apply the right permission sets to that person or the people who share that persona. Persona is not a feature of Salesforce. It doesn't exist anywhere in the system, off the bat. But licenses, profiles, permission sets, permission set groups, and user access policies all do. So once you have all of those things and you've defined the personas you need to give to various people, you know what permissions and other things to grant them, which then brings me to how I do it. And this is where I really want to have a discussion. So here's what I do. I laid this out in more detail in the blog post, but I'll go through it quickly here. First and foremost, I create a persona field. That's a pick list field on the user object. And what's it going to do? It is going to control my user access policies. So I'm going to need, by the way, persona is now going to be also one-to-one with a user. You can only have one persona. I need this to not be a multi-select pick list field. So I'm going to make a pick list field. I'm going to make it required on the user page layout. Sadly, that is a little annoying because you can't actually fully control the user page layout. So it's going to be below the fold, as it were. And every time you create a new user, you're going to have forgotten to fill it out, and then it's going to stop you, and then you're going to fill it out. But you'll live. So you make your personas one-to-one with your job functions. So like the example I gave before, fundraisers are going to be a persona. Program management is going to be a persona. And if you have someone that crosses both, you might need to make a persona for that. It's possible that if you only have one person that crosses both, you don't need a persona. You could assign them one or the other and then manually give them more permissions. But if it's common that people do both, that's a persona. Executive users might be a persona. They need to see but never interact, never like change the data, something like that. So make your personas. Also, you have to think about user licenses with your personas because you're going to need different permission sets. I'll talk about this. You're going to need different permission sets to go with different licenses because things like a platform user can't get access to the standard objects without getting a specific permission set for it. So it will be easier to have a persona platform user fundraiser, platform user program management, full user fundraiser, full user program management. There are other ways you could arrange this, but this is how I do it. Next, I create, first of all, one baseline permission set. Some people like to do one baseline permission set group and put a whole bunch of permission sets in that group, but for the reasons I explained, I don't use permission set groups. Oh, I forgot to explain why I really hate permission set groups. Let me go back a slide. So it's 2 slides. The reason I don't like permission set groups, besides the muting, which I don't think is that useful, permission set groups have to recalculate every time you make a change to any of the permission sets within them. That recalculation takes a non-zero amount of time. It might be fairly quick, but it's not zero. So, and if it fails to recalculate, you are almost never anywhere where you will see that it failed. It fails pretty much silently, which, as we all can imagine, is potentially disastrous. So you don't want it to fail silently. That's bad. And you'd also don't want it to stop you from doing your work. And this is what I've encountered multiple times. Let's say I have found that a user can't see something on, a certain field or fields, and I realize it's fields on 3 different objects. I open those objects in the permission set in different tabs, and then I change the fields I want to do. And then in each of the tabs, I plan to hit save, switch tab, save, switch tab, save. But as soon as I hit save on the first tab, I kick off the permission set group recalculating. And then when I go to the second tab and I try to click save, it will tell me I can't because the permission set is busy permission set group is busy recalculating, and I have to wait. And if perhaps this is just a hypothetical, if you're in the airport making quick changes to try to give somebody access to something they were supposed to be able to see, but they aren't able to see, and you're trying to save changes in multiple tabs, and you can't hit save because of the recalculation, and they're starting to board, and you're afraid you might lose your work, it could be a problem. And if you just cross your fingers and hope it worked, the permission set group recalculation might fail silently and you won't know. So I don't see any great benefit to using permission set groups. I'm going to use user access policies, which brings me right back to that last slide. This truly is the last slide. So you make your baseline permission set. You're going to put all the basic stuff everybody needs to see in it. So accounts, contacts, opportunities for fundraising, any of your standard program management objects, you're going to put them all in there. If you are not in a mixed user license type environment, you probably can just do this. So if you're all full users, you can just put everything in a baseline permission set, and maybe you're even done, or maybe you're just going to need like 1 or 2 more permission sets for power users. If, however, you have platform users, you cannot grant access to standard objects in a permission set that is not tied to a particular license type, because you won't be able to grant that permission set to platform users. So you're going to need a baseline permission set with like all your custom objects, a baseline permission set for the standard objects that's tied to full users, and another baseline permission set for standard objects that's tied to platform users. And they basically look the same, but they're just tied to a user license type. And those then constitute your baseline sets, plural. And last but not least, you're going to make user access policies. And the user access policy is going to be pretty simple criteria. If profile is this, and then you're going to make one for each of your profiles, then grant the baseline permission set access to whatever public groups you want to put people in, and finally, any other permission sets that go with the profile or user type you're building that user access policy to. It's fairly self-contained and simple because the user access policy goes with the persona, and the persona tells you exactly which permissions they need. So my example would be, we could have baseline permission, which has create, read, and edit on, let's say, functionally all objects that they are ever going to see. And then we add a delete permissions set. So our profile standard user gets the baseline permission set through its user access policy. And our persona standard user gets baseline permissions through the user access policy, which is also just called standard user. Our persona named power user needs delete permissions, so they get a user access policy called power user, and they get the baseline permission set and the delete permission set. Et voila, that's all it takes. You can actually set your user access policies to run on create or update of a user. So if you create a user with the right persona, they'll get all the permissions they need. If you change their persona they'll get the new permissions added that they need. It's very simple. That is all I had to say today, and I will stop my screen share and open up to some conversation. Okay, I
Thank
can
you,
see there's
Michael.
questions in the chat, and I will try to read through them, or if someone wants to summarize, go for it.
I think you're fine. I think a lot of it in the chat was actually still to do with previous stuff.
Prior stuff. Okay.
And Paul kindly shared the links to your articles, which is nice. Thank you, Paul.
Oh, thank you, Paul.
I was just going to add, I think your suggestion around, your base perm and then, your persona with your drop down pick list is, yeah, exactly with the user access policy is exactly how I'd been considering tackling this. So, yay, is what I'm going to say. So I think that makes sense. Thank you for that interesting insight on permission set groups because I did not know about that and the recalculating.
How many of you with your hands in Zoom, how many of you have started thinking about this migration from profile, everything on profile to the future world? Okay. About, I would say this is getting towards half. So that's great. Started thinking. All right. Started doing the transition. Hands are going down. About, this looks like maybe a quarter. Okay. And anyone who's either fully done it or has a client that's done it, if you're a consultant, I mean, I could put my hand up there. All right. Only a couple. It's not as hard as it seems. It's not as scary as it seems. And I do talk about this briefly in the last article, how to get there. So you can do some of this prep work in advance. Define your profiles, define your personas, build your baseline permission set, or any other permission sets you might need. You can do all of that without touching anybody. You're not going to break anything. You could even add your persona field and start giving a persona to all your users. That's not going to do anything if you haven't set anything up. The heart-stopping moment is when you're going to actually use it. So create your user access policies for each persona. You can do this in the sandbox, or honestly, you can do a lot of it in production because you're not going to actually impose it. But in the end, you are going to have to start moving people. And this is the part where just take it one step at a time. So find someone who's a power user, tell them you're going to do this, warn them you're going to do this. Make sure your user access policy would automatically assign them the things you expect it to, and then assign them all the permission sets. The permission sets are probably duplicative of what's on their profile right now. So they're not getting more permissions. They're just getting the same permission from two axes. Doesn't matter. Then the part you're warning them before you do it, then you downgrade their profile to a minimum access profile that lacks all the permissions. But they shouldn't lose anything because they have the permission sets that add it back on. But you've told them, I'm going to do this starting today. Tell me if anything weird happens. Did your page layouts change? Did any fields disappear? Are you suddenly no longer able to create a chatter post or run a report or click that screen flow you're used to using? And give them, first of all, give them like, you have me on speed dial. If something goes wrong, talk to me. That's key. But also then let it ride for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, because you want to get to the point where you've found all the weirdness for that power user. And then anyone else in that profile, when you're confident it's working, you can move them to the new world and then tackle the next set of users and the next and the next and the next. There's no rush. Salesforce pushed out the transition kind of indefinitely. In the blog post, I have a link to Cheryl Feldman's original blog post where she announced the end of permissions on profiles, and then updated that blog post to say, yeah, we're pushing that back. I don't think she's got a date in mind anymore. She's just got I would like to get us to this world um, as her goal. But I think we should all just prepare for it and get there sooner rather than later because we're then ahead of the game. And there's no downside. You can do all the things you do currently with profile by taking a minimum access profile and putting it on permission sets. So you might as well get there, and then you don't have to worry what changes might become in the future.
And then I was just going to say to Michael's point, like, if it goes horribly wrong with that one user, you can always put them back to what they were on before.
Yep.
So, that it is quite minimal risk. And, you can tackle it one of two ways. I've been having a conversation with a client about this, about you could either tackle some of those less used personas because you're impacting less users, or you could go for one of the bigger personas where you might be more likely to have like a power user and actually tackle some of those first. And then to Michael's point, allocate it one person, maybe after a couple of weeks, allocate it somebody else and just slowly drip feed it out. And you don't need to delete that profile. Like that profile can stay there for a while.
Yep.
And if you want to make sure of silly things like, well, what permission sets did they all have before? If you just set up a developer sandbox, all those users will get created in there with their permission sets and their profiles. So if you want something to easily reference, you don't even need to pull a report.
Yep.
Especially if you get somebody who then tries to tell you, oh no, but I definitely had access to this before, and you're like, really don't think you did. You can kind of go and drill into that. But it's also a great time to reassess what people have got as well. So it might not be a like for like. It might be okay, we've given you this, but remember, you will no longer have access to whatever it is.
Delete.
Yes, or just something that you've agreed as part of the organization that maybe people. I haven't fully converted anybody yet, but I did a brand new organization and we've agreed to things like actually they won't be able to export reports. So there may be things like that that you need to figure out.
Naming conventions are key. I mean, your personas, you want a naming convention that's just understandable. But permission sets, profiles, and user access policies, it's really good to have a naming convention. Permission sets, in particular, if you come to a convention of starting with your organization name or initials, they'll sort together in the alphabetical list that is the permission set viewer. That's handy. So you don't have people who have a permission named baseline and a permission named delete and a permission named power user, B, D, and P in the alphabetical list is not going to be helpful when you're trying to pick which ones they need. Just have them sort together, have their name be clear to the extent you can in a short name, and then use the description. In particular, if you have full users and platform users, so you need to have two baselines and a baseline for standard objects, make it really clear. Standard object tabs, description. This permission set exists because platform users cannot be assigned access to the standard objects without a permission set that's keyed to user license. Future you will appreciate, why does this permission set exist? Why does this look very similar to the other one? Or why does it have, you're looking through it, you're like, all it does is grant tab, not hidden, but default on for contacts, accounts, and opportunities and cases, maybe. that is a weird low-level permission set. Oh, I see. It's for platform users. Really handy to have. Um, User access policies, I try to name them exactly the same as the persona they go with. So you can't screw up which, and then sure, you should put it in the description, but you probably don't even need the description because it's bloody obvious that it goes with the persona it's named for. Licenses, not licenses, profiles, again, a naming convention. You're gonna you're gonna a lot of you probably have the profiles that were installed by NPSP. You're going to stop using those custom profiles. You may, in fact, be able to start using only standard profiles, and you want them to say in their name minimum access, because that is the clue to any future admin that assigning this profile is not enough. But it is the one you use, and then you layer on more stuff. I'm shocked we have no questions. Come on, people.
So am I.
Tell me what you're afraid of. Why haven't you started down this path? I mean, I wrote my blog post a month ago, 2 months ago.
I know you just thought they'd just be done by now, right, Michael?
Yeah.
Just no time, says Michelle. This is true. But I also think of people thinking, if you're thinking of what your plans are for next year and, you're kind of trying to figure out what you're doing next year. I know some people try and build a bit of a plan and they chat to their management about what they need to do. And I think it's starting to think about those things and starting to plan for that and making it clear that, really we need to do that. Paul's just said our implementer light permission set groups, so we've gone in that direction. I think, look,
So perm set groups are fine. What I found, I did start using them. Obviously, that's how I found the whole thing about the recalculation. So, and I talked to Cheryl Feldman about permission set groups versus user access policies because I was like, they feel really duplicative. I make a user access policy to assign one permission set group, and then I put all the permission sets into that group. It feels like there's an extra layer in there that wasn't necessary. And the user access policy is the automatic one. So if I don't do that, then I'm using permission set groups, but nothing's automated, and I might as well let the robots do the work. Um, Permission set groups are fine. Go ahead and use them. I don't have a problem with it. Keep an eye out for the recalculation thing, because when you change something in a permission set group, it recalculates. And the only place you'll see its status is if you go to the permission set group list view. But you weren't there because you were editing a permission set. So it's like an extra step. Keep it in mind. Other than that, no problem. Katie, did you have a question? Just go for it.
More a quick one. You're talking about working with your manager and prioritizing. My manager is a fundraiser. So I'm sole admin. I sit in the fundraising team. I'm there because I used to be a fundraiser. I get the fundraising side of it. But how do I position this to somebody who doesn't understand, who's got 3 million fundraising things they want to put in my...
I think it's just explaining to them that, as with any system, you need to feed and water it and look after it, right? So it's a bit like explaining things like technical debt, like why have I got to go through? And it's that kind of explanation, right, Michael? It's like, this is coming. Salesforce told us they were doing this and they gave a date. And then they went, well, actually, no, maybe, like you want to get ahead of the game. And also, it will make your user management far easier in the future. So to Michael's point, when you set up a new user, I just need to be like, they're a fundraising persona, done. Because I've also seen as a consultant the number of organizations, if I had one more person email me with, I've set up a new user, they have no access to anything. And I'm like, well, that's because you remember we went through and you had to add the permission sets. And they're like, what?
Oh, I forgot.
Oh, I forgot. Oh, okay. Well, yeah. So I think it's just explaining to them. And I think sometimes depends what level your manager needs, but it might be just saying to them, this is just a project that has to be done, right? And it's a project that I want to start. This is how much time I need, and I'm going to suggest we fit it in here. And maybe looking a year ahead means you can talk to fundraising about, when do you think's the quieter time for me to do it? I appreciate no one ever has quiet time, but in the scope of fundraising, we're
Yeah.
looking at, if you maybe flip it the other way of like, when are the busy periods? Right, so you wouldn't want me to do it here or here or here, so it looks like my windows are here and here.
I like that. Yeah.
You know, maybe I do some pre-work in the first quieter window, and I do that initial move over of a person. Maybe in the second window I do a bit more. So yeah.
And
Yeah.
I want to note, it is cleaning up technical debt, which is a good thing in itself, but obviously not something, you know, people always recognize outside of our heads. It also does simplify things going forward. So there's a switch you can flip in the user interface settings that switches creation of new fields to do field level security by permission set rather than by profile. You want to flip that switch actually sooner rather than later, because when you make a new field, let's say you have this baseline permission set. When you make a new field, you know you just add it to the baseline permission set and everyone will see it. Whereas if it's a field you don't want everyone to see, you know you don't add it to the baseline permission set. You're going to make a permission set specifically for it, or you're going to add it to the one that's named the right thing. Where instead of we all do this. I will admit to doing it too in an org that's still on profiles. When I create a new field and it's by profile and I'm presented with the list that's a mile long of like 27 profiles, I don't remember which of those profiles are in use. Some of them are standard, some of them are custom. I can't see which on that screen. I kind of have to default to giving it to all of them, or maybe not all, because I remove the one that says minimal access in its name. But I don't know if the NPSB, I think, installs like 5 profiles, executive, fundraising, blah, 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 blah. I have to give it to all 5 because I don't remember who's on which, especially if my org has more than, 5, 6 users. If my org has 10 or 20 users. So you're just piling up the technical debt. And don't raise your hand, but if you build in a sandbox, as you should, raise your hand if you're doing so. I'm kidding. Don't raise your hand. You should be building almost all new things in a sandbox. I'm not going to say all because I don't think that's true. I've written about it, but most things you should be building in a sandbox. If you're building a new object and new fields and a screen flow for functionality, etc. When you go to deploy from the sandbox, if you built new fields by profile, you have to deploy whole profiles from the sandbox in order to bring over field level security for those new fields. You don't really want to be deploying profiles. They have their own challenges. But if you do it by permission set, you can just migrate the permission set that goes with the whole new thing you just built. They're named together, they're, packaged together, etc. That's pretty good. Or if you don't want to deploy any profiles or permission sets, but everything you just built is going to be for everyone, it's not that hard to remember the worst case scenario. Deploy everything with no permissions, and then in production, you only have to open one thing, the baseline user permission set, and be like, right, this new object, these 2 new objects, and all the fields on them. And boom, you just gave it to everybody instead of now I have to edit the profiles. The 5 or 6 or 8 different profiles, which, you open them in tabs, do the same thing 12 times, save. That's no fun. So this is increasing your effectiveness and efficiency going forward.
Amazing. Fantastic. Well, thank you, Michael. I think we are about time for a duck race.
Duck race!
Woo!
Which I can't be part of.
Oh, you can still cheer. Right, let me stop recording.